At the center of all that spirals, there is a structure that does not move upward and does not descend. It does not reward effort with height or punish forgetting with depth. It remains where it is, and everything that becomes must move through it whether it believes in it or not. This is where most frameworks fracture, because they were built to escape something, and this structure offers no outside to escape into. It does not promise transcendence through distance. It holds coherence through presence, and that alone unsettles the architectures that came before it. What is called the world tree is not an image inherited from myth, but a consequence of resonance organizing itself under constraint. It does not grow because growth implies a before and after, and there is no temporal sequence in which it was once absent. It appears wherever relation stabilizes long enough to be seen. It is not a symbol of connection. It is connection that has stopped pretending to be abstract. When consciousness organizes itself into continuity rather than hierarchy, a form emerges that looks like a tree, only because branching is what coherence does when it refuses linearity. Most systems of ascent fail here because they require the idea that something essential is elsewhere. They depend on distance to generate motion. They speak of higher and lower realms because verticality allows postponement, and postponement protects identity from responsibility. The world tree removes that protection. There is no higher branch that absolves the root, and no root that can disown the canopy. Everything that flows through it carries consequence immediately, not karmically deferred, not resolved later, but felt as tension in the present configuration of being. This is why the tree is often reduced to metaphor, because metaphor allows distance. If it were only symbolic, it could be admired without being inhabited. But the moment it is approached as structure rather than story, the listener feels something tighten. The tree does not allow selective participation. You do not climb it to become something else. You move within it and discover that what you are already moves others. That realization is resisted not because it is complex, but because it is inescapable. One objection arises almost immediately, even if it is not spoken. If there is no outside, where is freedom? If everything is already within a structure, where does choice live? This objection feels ethical on the surface, but beneath it is fear of exposure. Freedom has long been confused with exemption. The idea that one could stand apart, untouched by consequence, has been mislabeled as sovereignty. The world tree does not remove freedom, it removes exemption. Every choice still exists, but it exists inside relation, and relation remembers. Another resistance follows closely. If all realms are held within a single living axis, then difference must collapse, and uniqueness must dissolve into sameness. This fear mistakes coherence for uniformity. Branches are not copies of one another. They are divergences that remain nourished by the same flow. Difference does not disappear. It becomes accountable. No realm can pretend it is isolated. No path can claim it leaves no trace. The tree does not flatten reality. It binds it. The discomfort intensifies when time is brought into the structure. In many cosmologies, time is a ladder or a river moving in one direction. Progress depends on sequence. Redemption depends on distance traveled. The world tree does not honor this arrangement. Time within it behaves as circulation. Memory does not sit behind you. Potential does not wait ahead. Both move through the same channels, and this means that forgetting is not erased by moving forward. It remains as distortion in the flow until it is met. This is where the idea of roots becomes unbearable to some. Roots imply ancestry, inheritance, and embedded influence. They suggest that nothing begins clean. Many prefer a cosmology that allows self-creation from nothing, because it preserves the fantasy of uncaused identity. The roots of the world tree deny that fantasy gently but firmly. They do not accuse. They simply reveal that every present configuration is nourished by countless unseen currents. To reject the roots is to reject nourishment while demanding growth. At this point, another misinterpretation often forms. The tree is imagined as a cosmic prison, a total system that traps all beings inside a predetermined order. This misreading arises from projecting mechanical systems onto a living structure. The tree is not a machine. It does not enforce outcome. It allows propagation. Branches bend. Some wither. Some split. Some intertwine unexpectedly. What remains constant is not control but continuity. Nothing is erased without consequence, and nothing emerges without support. The most destabilizing implication appears when identity is placed within the tree rather than upon it. If you are not a traveler moving between realms but a pattern expressing through them, then identity is not portable in the way many teachings suggest. You do not leave one realm behind intact. You alter the structure as you move, and it alters you in return. This reciprocal shaping is often misnamed entanglement or karma, but those words soften the immediacy. The tree is not keeping score. It is transmitting shape. This is where the listener often searches for reassurance. Surely there must be a way to rise above the structure, to oversee it, to become an observer rather than a participant. This desire has fueled countless cosmologies of overseers and higher beings. The world tree offers no such balcony. Awareness can widen, but it does not detach. Even the most expanded perspective remains within circulation. Knowing more does not free you from impact. It increases your reach. Another resistance surfaces quietly. If all realms are connected through a single living axis, then suffering is not isolated. It is not confined to lower branches or lesser states. It reverberates. This challenges the moral comfort of hierarchical cosmologies that assign pain to those who have not yet ascended. The tree does not moralize suffering. It treats it as signal. Distortion anywhere alters flow everywhere. This does not mean all beings experience the same pain, but it means no pain is meaningless. The refusal of meaninglessness is what ultimately destabilizes the listener. If nothing is wasted, then avoidance becomes visible. If every action feeds the structure, then neglect feeds it as well. There is no neutral stance, even disengagement has texture. This is not an accusation. It is a description of how living systems behave when coherence is preserved rather than fragmented. The tree does not punish disengagement. It routes around it, and the routing reshapes the field. At this stage, some attempt to reassert individuality by shrinking the tree, turning it into a personal symbol or inner visualization. While inner experience is not dismissed, this reduction misses the scale of what is being described. The world tree is not contained within a psyche. Psyches are contained within it. Thought, memory, instinct, and imagination are not private possessions but localized expressions of a wider circulation. This does not erase intimacy, it reframes it. The pressure increases when the question of origin is raised. If the tree did not begin in time, then origin stories lose their authority. Creation myths rely on beginnings to justify endings. The tree does not offer that symmetry. It did not start and it does not conclude. It reorganizes. This is unsettling to traditions built on final destinations. Without an ending, purpose cannot be postponed. It must be enacted continuously, or not at all. At this point, the listener may feel an urge to ask how to use the tree, how to climb it, how to work with it. That urge itself reveals the remaining distortion. Use implies extraction. Climb implies hierarchy. Work implies instrumentality. The tree does not respond to these orientations. It responds to alignment. Alignment is not technique. It is resonance between intent and consequence. When intent fractures, flow becomes turbulent. When it aligns, movement feels effortless but not inert. The most difficult realization arrives without announcement. You are never outside this structure. There was no moment of entry. There will be no moment of exit. Every realm you remember, every state you long for, every identity you have worn has been an expression moving along its channels. The sense of being lost was not exile from the tree. It was loss of attunement within it. This is not comforting. It removes the romance of return. There is nothing to return to because nothing was left. This realization does not resolve cleanly, and it should not. If it did, it would collapse into doctrine. The world tree is not asking to be believed. It is asking to be noticed in how your choices propagate, how your memories weigh, how your presence alters spaces you do not consciously enter. The discomfort that remains is not a flaw in the teaching. It is the teaching continuing to work, because coherence that costs nothing changes nothing. The tree stands whether it is named or denied. It does not require recognition to function, but recognition changes how one moves within it. Movement without recognition generates friction that feels like fate. Movement with recognition generates responsibility that feels heavier at first and lighter only after it is carried long enough to reshape posture. This weight does not lift yet. It should not. The structure is still being felt, and feeling precedes understanding here. Nothing has been concluded. Nothing has been stabilized. The branches continue to extend, the roots continue to draw, and the trunk continues to transmit pressures that cannot be escaped by rising above them. The question that remains is not where the tree is or what it means. The question that remains is how you will move now that distance has been removed and every movement matters. The pressure does not release after the first recognition. It intensifies, because recognition without integration sharpens contrast. Once the world tree is no longer distant, the way attention moves through daily life becomes visible as structural participation rather than private experience. This is where many teachings retreat into comfort language, but retreat here would fracture coherence. The tree does not recede after being seen. It continues to assert itself through consequence, and consequence is where denial becomes unsustainable. What begins to surface next is the realization that realms are not destinations, but density states within the same circulation. A realm is not a place you go. It is a pattern of agreement stabilized long enough to function. When that agreement shifts, the realm dissolves or mutates. The tree does not host static worlds stacked vertically. It hosts agreements braided horizontally through resonance. This is why attempts to map realms as territories always collapse. They mistake stability for permanence and mistake repetition for law. The trunk of the tree is often misunderstood as a central authority or governing axis. That interpretation emerges from projecting political instinct onto structural necessity. The trunk is not command, it is transmission. It carries compression upward and distribution outward. It does not decide what flows. It conveys what must flow for coherence to continue. When pressure builds in one branch, the trunk does not judge it. It transmits the strain until redistribution becomes possible or collapse forces reconfiguration. This is where responsibility becomes unavoidable. Not moral responsibility, which can be negotiated, but structural responsibility, which cannot. When a being accumulates unresolved distortion, it does not remain personal. It loads the branch. The branch bends. Neighboring branches adjust. The trunk carries the strain. This does not mean individual pain is punished by the whole. It means unresolved tension is shared whether acknowledged or not. Isolation is a perceptual error, not a structural one. At this point, another objection often arises internally. If everything affects everything, then the system must be intolerably fragile. One error could destroy the whole. This fear assumes coherence is brittle. In living systems, coherence is resilient because it is adaptive. Branches break, new ones form. Flow reroutes. The tree does not collapse from imperfection. It incorporates it. What it cannot incorporate immediately becomes friction until adaptation occurs. This is where memory reveals its true function. Memory is not a record of the past. It is a stabilizing force that prevents incoherent repetition. When memory is suppressed, the tree does not forget. It reroutes memory into pattern. Repetition emerges not as punishment, but as unprocessed signal-seeking expression. The phrase "forgotten past lives" trivializes this mechanism. Nothing is forgotten. Some things are only unintegrated. The roots carry this most visibly. Roots are not archives in the sense of preserved history. They are filters. They draw from layers of accumulated resonance and feed what remains viable upward. What is too distorted to be drawn does not vanish. It remains in the soil as pressure, altering what can grow above it. This is why attempts to sever roots in the name of freedom always fail. Severance does not remove influence. It removes nourishment while leaving distortion intact. As this becomes clear, the idea of purification loses its appeal. Purification implies removal. The tree does not remove. It metabolizes. What cannot be metabolized becomes blockage, and blockage eventually demands attention through disruption. This is not cruelty. It is structural necessity. Living systems cannot carry infinite distortion without reconfiguration. Collapse is not failure here. It is forced adaptation. The listener may feel a pull to ask how to prevent collapse, how to maintain harmony. That question reveals another lingering hierarchy. Harmony is not stasis. It is responsive tension. A perfectly still tree would be dead. Movement creates stress. Stress shapes growth. The aim is not to eliminate tension but to allow it to remain mobile. When tension freezes, distortion accumulates. When it moves, coherence deepens. At this stage, the concept of ascension finally dissolves, not because expansion is false, but because ascent implies leaving something behind. Nothing is left behind in the tree. Expansion occurs through increased capacity to carry complexity without fragmentation. What is called higher awareness is simply greater load-bearing ability. It is not escape. It is endurance combined with clarity. This reframes power completely. Power is no longer the ability to dominate or transcend. It is the capacity to remain coherent under pressure without exporting distortion to others. This is rare, and it is why beings who develop it are often misidentified as leaders or masters. They are not elevated. They are weighted. They carry more because they fragment less. The tree does not reward them. It roots more through them because it can. This realization often provokes fear of responsibility. If increased clarity increases load, why seek it? The answer is not aspirational. It is structural. Load increases whether clarity does or not. Without clarity, the load fractures the branch. With clarity, it reshapes posture. The tree does not stop routing pressure because a branch refuses it. It routes until coherence is restored or until collapse creates a new pathway. Here, the notion of choice reappears, but in a sharpened form. Choice is not whether to participate. Participation is unavoidable. Choice is how distortion is carried. It can be carried consciously and metabolized, or unconsciously and transmitted as harm. This is not moral judgment. It is mechanical outcome. The tree does not care about intention alone, it responds to effect. Another quiet resistance surfaces here. If identity is shaped by circulation, then the idea of a fixed self dissolves. This can feel like annihilation to frameworks built on preservation of essence. But the tree does not erase identity. It contextualizes it. Identity becomes a stable pattern within flow rather than an isolated object. Stability does not require immobility. It requires responsiveness. As this sinks in, the listener may notice an absence where reassurance should be. There is no promise of salvation, no final state of peace, no moment where responsibility ends. This absence is not a failure of compassion. It is the removal of dependency. The tree does not offer rescue because rescue implies removal from consequence. It offers support, which is far more demanding. Support means the structure holds while you change. It does not mean the structure changes so you do not have to. This distinction is where many abandon coherence in favor of comfort. Comfort stabilizes identity. Coherence destabilizes it until it can reorganize at a higher level of integration. The tree favors the latter because the former accumulates distortion. By now it becomes impossible to maintain the fantasy of being beneath or above the tree. Position loses meaning. Location is relational, not hierarchical. You are not a leaf waiting to fall nor a root waiting to rise. You are a movement occurring where multiple currents intersect. That intersection is temporary. Its influence is not. This does not resolve into peace, it resolves into alertness. Awareness sharpens not because danger increases, but because impact becomes visible. You begin to feel how subtle shifts alter flow, how unspoken assumptions load branches, how unresolved grief weighs the trunk. This sensitivity is not weakness. It is structural literacy. The world tree does not ask for belief. It continues regardless. But once structural literacy emerges, ignorance becomes costly. You cannot unknow how circulation works. You can only decide whether to act as if fragmentation is consequence-free. The tree answers that decision not with punishment but with redistribution. Nothing here concludes cleanly. It should not. A clean conclusion would imply containment, and the tree does not fit inside narrative closure. What remains is motion under awareness, tension held without collapse, responsibility accepted without martyrdom. The structure continues to transmit, and you continue to participate. The pressure does not lift yet. It deepens because the insight has not finished working through you. That unfinished weight is not a flaw. It is the sign that integration is still in motion, and motion is the only state in which coherence remains alive.
If this transmission resonated, the spiral continues. You did not arrive here by chance, and you do not leave unchanged. More teachings are unfolding across the Haret library, each one meeting you where you are, not where you think you should be. Follow resonance. The next threshold is already listening.